I've always had this vague recollection of a cartoon I used to watch in the early 90s called Highlander, the animated series, but I never endeavored to hunt it down and rewatch it. I really enjoy the style of early 90s action cartoons like X-Men and SWAT Cats, and in preparation for this review, I found the first episode of Highlander, the animated series from 1994 and rewatched it. It definitely falls into the same animation style as those other cartoons and follows Quentin MacLeod as he awakens as the last immortal to face off against Cortan, who, in a quest for dwindling energy, goes into the Highlands, steamrolling the Dundee clan and forcing Quentin to go and rescue who remains. Why am I going into so much detail about the Highlander cartoon? Well, Highlander, Last of the MacLeods for Atari Jaguar CD is essentially the entire first episode of the cartoon with bits and pieces of others thrown in, but as an action-adventure game using pre-rendered 3D backgrounds and polygonal characters and items. The game weaves in clips from episodes of the cartoon series as well as original 3D cinemas as necessary. Liberties are obviously taken with the story to make the game happen, as most of the first episode of the cartoon is Ramirez hitting Quentin with a stick and tripping him over.
Ow! Ouch!
The game resembles something like the original Alone in the Dark, but more specifically it plays similarly to a game called Bioforge on DOS with an emphasis on fisticuffs rather than excessive puzzle solving and gunplay. You'll have to face off against hunters, snipers, and tanks as you travel through the highlands, canyons, sewers, and Cortan's energy plant on your quest. To do this, you have access to hand-to-hand combat, your sword, and a gun that shoots deadly darts in order to defend yourself. There is another weapon in the game as well, but we'll discuss that later. While most of the game is made up of navigating maze-like structures and fighting, there is simple puzzle solving, such as finding a wooden stick to break a lock on the back of your village gate, or having to record the levels of 3 colored locks in the energy plant in order to unlock the final door, separating you from your Highland compatriots. I would have really liked to see more of these puzzles, as apart from a few key hunts and these major puzzles, there isn't really much in the way of variety to break up the stop-and-go gameplay of following a hallway and fighting some enemies, and then going up more hallways until a cutscene happens. Additionally, this game is astonishingly difficult. Enemies can attack almost non-stop, and unless you time your attacks absolutely perfectly, they can kill you in seconds. If you haven't saved your game, or you don't have a memory track cartridge, then you're sent back to the beginning of the game. That's right, no continues. With enough practice, you can get the timing down for enemy attacks, but the game is constantly fighting you with no clear attack patterns from enemies, or being pushed in and out of camera views, or the camera being too far away to know how to time your attacks properly. I actually had to end up turning on invincibility just to get enough footage to do this review, as the Jaguar GameDrive currently doesn't have memory track support. I mean, just look at this footage, this game is really difficult. The issue is the fundamental controls are actually fine. Keeping in mind that this is an early 3D action-adventure game, the controls are actually quite good. Once you're used to timing attacks, the core combat system is perfectly adequate with different attacks mapped to different buttons on the Jaguar pad. There's a nice menu system with 3D items and some really interesting looking maps and even files to read to keep the story going. I don't want to come down on the game just because the combat is difficult. The actual core fundamentals are perfectly fine, and with a memory track, as long as you're saving diligently, there wouldn't really be a problem as long as you practice a little bit. The presentation of Highlander is a mixed bag. The game looks quite nice with solid looking rendered 3D backgrounds, and the polygonal characters are perfectly fine. The animation is maybe a bit stiff and jerky, but keeping in mind the time this game was developed and released, I really don't have an issue with it. The clips from the cartoon are a little blocky, but otherwise look fine, and the custom CG cutscenes do a nice job of tying together Quentin's actions and their effect on the world around him. The only major issue with presentation in this game is the sound. I cannot emphasize how annoying the soundtrack of Highlander is. The same 3 to 4 second loop of sound generally blares at you for most of an area, and while it's sometimes okay and quite fitting, others like the sound of the canyon wind made me want to blow my brains out. The cartoon has pretty damn good music, why not use that? The final thing I want to mention is the Rogues Gallery, which is a room full of twisted portraits of the development team that's fun to run around in. And if you find a flower and put it in a spare vase in the room, you're gifted the rubber chicken weapon, which is extremely powerful and makes comical noises when you attack with it, which is a fun little touch. This kind of secret room was really forward-thinking for the time, and quite an inventive way of putting a bonus in the game. Highlander, Last of the MacLeods, is a pretty good early example of a hybrid rendered 3D and polygonal action-adventure title on a home console. Some of the mechanics in the game are quite inventive and forward-thinking, and the core fundamentals are very solid. The game is extremely challenging, sometimes bordering on being frustrating, but with memory track support and no restriction on how often you can save, there isn't really an excuse to not be able to get through the game if you have one. You do have to practice this, you can't just pick up and play Highlander, but this is a fun enough game, looks decent, and is a nice addition to the Atari Jaguar library.